A Florida man has contracted a very rare and potentially deadly form of anthrax.
Rare inhaled form of anthrax. Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson calls it an isolated case and says there was no threat of terrorism.
In Boca Raton, Florida today, a memorial service for Bob Stevens. He is almost certainly the first American to be killed in a deliberate anthrax attack.
Now to the home front and those concerns over anthrax in Florida. After one man died from the illness and his co-worker was contaminated, the FBI has taken over the investigation.
America strikes back. Anthrax, another infection, this time at NBC News in Rockefeller Plaza. Good evening. Tonight we find ourselves in the unusual and unhappy position of reporting on one of our beloved colleagues, a member of my personal staff who has contracted a cutaneous anthrax infection. That's an infection of the skin that is responding favorably to treatment, and her full recovery is expected.
Just a week's time, we have had 4 confirmed cases of anthrax, all with media connections, and a number of anthrax scares as well. ABC News.
In Nevada, in New Jersey tonight,
the U.S. House of Representatives is closing offices today until Tuesday to allow a complete sweep for traces of anthrax. And 29 staffers for Senator Tom Daschle's office have tested positive for exposure to anthrax.
The letters sent to NBC and the New York Post were the same. This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great. The letter sent to Senator Tom Daschle had similar wording. You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid? Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great. All carried the date 9/11/01 at the top. All were sent from Trenton, New Jersey.
I don't have anthrax.
Good morning. President Bush tries reassuring the nation after anthrax is found at a facility that handles mail going to the White House.
President Bush is calling those people who are mailing these anthrax letters evildoers, and he says any attempt to terrorize this nation is going to fail.
Another day of germ warfare and still no sign the worst case of bioterrorism in this country is close to being solved.
The government scientist who took his own life rather than face charges of hatching the diabolical 2001 anthrax attacks.
The FBI says the heart of its case is a DNA fingerprint of the anthrax sent through the mail. But it will be several more days before the government discloses its entire case. For now, victims and their relatives say they've heard next to nothing, including the widow of Bob Stevens, a Florida photo editor who was the first anthrax male victim to die.
I'm still hoping somehow, because of the investigation, supposedly, that we will get some answers. And that's for 7 years I've been waiting for that.
Solved but not closed. That's the word from officials looking into the 2001 anthrax attacks 8 days after the FBI's top suspect committed suicide. Army biowarfare specialist Bruce Ivins killed himself as prosecutors were getting ready to charge him with 5 counts of murder, one for each of the people who died in the attacks. 17 others were sickened.
Bruce Ivins' specialty was creating anthrax vaccine. In fact, Ivins is listed as the co-inventor of 2 patents for an anthrax vaccine. He stood to gain financially from the panic over the anthrax case. A financial motive? Perhaps.
Fight terror. First of all, I don't have anthrax. And it's hard for Americans to imagine how evil the people are who are doing this. We're having to adjust our thinking. We're a kind nation, we're a compassionate nation, we're a nation of strong values, and we value life. And we're learning people in this world, want to terrorize our country by trying to take life. They won't succeed. This country is too strong to allow terrorists to affect the lives of our citizens. I understand people are concerned, and they should be, but they need to know our government is doing everything we possibly can to protect the lives of our citizens. Everything.
U.S. officials say the Army scientists they suspected in the 2001 deadly anthrax attacks may have released the toxin as a way to test the strength of the drugs he was working on. Bruce Ivins committed suicide this week, just as federal prosecutors say they were planning to indict and seek the death penalty against him. Ivins, seen here juggling at a 1984 St. Patrick's Day festival in Maryland, was a top microbiologist who worked at this lab in Maryland. He was working to develop an anthrax vaccine and complained about the limitations of testing on animals. Authorities theorize that the anthrax may have been sent as a way to test the new vaccines. 5 people were killed in those attacks that terrified a nation already on edge from the 9/11 attacks.
There's no question that anybody who would mail anthrax with the attempt to harm American citizens is a terrorist. And there's no question that Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization, so it wouldn't put it past me that they're, it wouldn't surprise me that they're involved with this. But I have no direct evidence. I do know that this country is strong enough to endure the evil ones, and we're making great progress on the ground in Afghanistan, and we'll bring the Al-Qaeda to justice, and we're doing everything we can to find out who mailed these letters.
The Army scientist accused of carrying out the 2001 anthrax attacks emailed himself in 2007, saying he knew who the killer was. That's according to court documents unsealed Wednesday. Bruce Ivins apparently sent the email on September 7, 2007. In the email, Ivins says, yes, I finally know who mailed the anthrax letters in the fall of 2001. I've pieced it together. However, the email did not say who Ivins thought was the anthrax killer. Ivins killed himself in July, just as prosecutors prepared to charge him in the mailings that killed 5 people and sickened more than a dozen others. Ivins' attorney says his client was innocent and would have been cleared had the case gone to trial. However, the FBI investigation concluded that Ivins and Ivins alone was responsible for the attacks. Ivins worked at Fort Detrick in Maryland and had access to the deadly strain of anthrax used in the 2001 attacks. Carlotta Bradley, The Associated Press.
A 7-year mystery solved.
We are confident that Dr. Ivins was the only person responsible for these attacks.
The government has released dozens of documents it says prove Army microbiologist Bruce Ivins was behind the 2001 anthrax attacks that killed 5 and chilled a nation. Among them, one alleging Ivins had sole custody of highly purified anthrax spores with certain genetic mutations identical to the poison from the attacks. Another saying he was not able to give a good enough explanation for late lab work hours around the time of the attacks, painting a picture of a deeply troubled genius bordering on desperation at being caught, and who killed himself as authorities closed in.
We stand here today firmly convinced that we have the person who committed those attacks, and we are confident that had this gone to trial, we would have proved him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Is the issue of microbial forensics, where they were able to pinpoint that the anthrax that killed 5 people and wounded several others, injured several others, came from his lab. He created it and he maintained it.
A judge has unsealed documents revealing some information about how the FBI closed in on its top suspect. Officials hope that evidence answers the many questions that remain about the case and about how the FBI linked Ivins to the specific batch of anthrax used in the attacks.
Agents here at FBI headquarters gave victims and family members an inside look at the case against Ivins. But skeptics still have their doubts after the 7-year investigation, most of which was spent pointing the finger at the wrong suspect.
Before focusing on Ivins, the FBI said it was investigating one of his colleagues, Stephen Hatfill.
Stephen Hatfill, the former Army scientist the Justice Department investigated for years in the anthrax case but never indicted. Hatfill later sued.
He sued the Bureau. That case was settled when the FBI agreed to pay him almost $6 million.
A lawyer for Ivins, though, says he was innocent and that his death is the result of the government's relentless pressure of accusation and innuendo. Diane Kepley, The Associated Press.
And now to that anthrax investigation. As you know, the prime suspect committed suicide just as the government was getting ready to charge him with the attacks that killed 5 people and made 17 others sick. Today, federal prosecutors insisted that Bruce Ivins was the only person responsible, that they could have proven his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and they laid out their case for the public. Here's our justice correspondent, Bob Orr.
Newly released FBI evidence makes a strong circumstantial case that bioweapons researcher Bruce Ivins was a delusional sociopath who had the opportunity, motive, and means to be the 2001 anthrax killer.
We are confident that Dr. Ivins was the only person responsible for these attacks.
The most damning evidence, a flask of anthrax spores recovered in 2004 from Ivins' personal workspace at Fort Detrick, the Army Weapons Lab where he worked. In an affidavit written to justify searches of his home and lab, investigators charge Ivins was the custodian of a large flask of highly purified anthrax spores, genetically identical to the anthrax used in the attacks.
We have a flask that's effectively the murder weapon.
Investigators say Ivins had earlier lied to them, submitting false samples of anthrax from his lab in order to mislead. His odd behavior also drew suspicions. Just before the deadly letters were mailed, Ivins sent a chilling email to a friend warning bin Laden terrorists for sure have anthrax and sarin gas and have just decreed death to all Jews and all Americans.
The Justice Department may decide within days whether to close its investigation into the 2001 anthrax attacks, the only biological attacks in U.S. history. The reported chief suspect committed suicide earlier this week. But as Tony Guida reports tonight, many people feel we're still no closer to real answers.
Did the FBI get its man when Bruce Ivins, the government microbiologist linked to the deadly anthrax mailing 7 years ago, committed suicide? Or is Ivins the new Stephen Hatfield? They spawned a new industry, bioterrorism research. Hundreds of experts in dozens of labs trying to outthink the terrorists.
Terrorism experts and anthrax widows like Maureen Stevens agree this case cannot be marked closed unless the government reveals its evidence against Bruce Ivins. The Justice Department tells CBS News it hopes to do that by midweek. Jeff?
Tony Guida in New York. Tony, thank you very much.
Cutting-edge DNA technology apparently led investigators to Bruce Ivins, the government scientist they say is responsible for the deadly anthrax attacks in 2001. CBS News correspondent Reynold Pinkston reports.
The people who knew Bruce Ivins, his fellow church members, his friends, and former colleagues find it hard to believe that he killed people with anthrax.
He simply is not the kind of person that would do these things.
Ivins was a veteran government scientist specializing in countermeasures to anthrax attacks, like the one in 2001 that killed 5 people and shut down post offices. Law enforcement sources say anthrax found in letters was closely related to the kind of anthrax that Ivins worked with in his lab. He committed suicide last week as prosecutors were reportedly preparing to bring charges against him.
He was extremely agitated.
This is the voice of therapist Jean Dooley, who went to court to get a restraining order against Ivins because of threats he allegedly made in a group counseling session.
Because he was about to be indicted on capital murder charges, he was going to go out in a blaze of glory, that he was going to take everybody out with him.
So far, federal authorities have not formally released details of Ivins' role in the attacks. Former Senator Tom Daschle, who received one of the anthrax letters, hopes the files will be opened.
I think the American people are deserved more of an accounting on this investigation and some appreciation of how to bring this to closure.
Law enforcement sources say the FBI and the Department of Justice are considering closing the case and making the files public. A decision could be made